And so it's only through that recognition that I can actually love fully. I can't love if there's a part of me that I'm denying and pretending doesn't exist. I can't love if I pretend that I'm not also impacting someone's life in ways of suffering. And so I think that love is political because it presses you to face the parts of you that have been hidden and may not have received the love. And that happens in our relationships too.
Chelsea!
Koya!
Oh, it is so good to see you.
It's so great to see you as well.
You are like a ray of sunshine.
Oh, bless you.
Every time I see you, your smile just lights up the room. And I am just so grateful for the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Koya.
I mean,
Thank you.
I know we get together at least once or twice a year.
Yep.
And we download forever,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and I just love that we've had this relationship over the last couple of years, that even if we don't see each other but a couple of times a year, we really connect on the biggest issues going on and really share like our struggles and our wins and things like that. So I just want you to kind of let everyone listening kind of into your life. And I want to start with, how do you feel right now? If you had one word to describe, because you're doing a lot. You just got back from Ohio, you've been to Paris. How do you feel right now?
I feel inspired.
Inspired.
Yeah, I feel really inspired. Yeah.
And what are just the places you've been this year? Because you've been all over.
Yeah, sure. So just last weekend I was in Paris, which was really great. I've never been to Paris before. In July I was in London. I'm headed to Shenzhen, China, and to Shanghai. And so I'm really excited about that. Spent a magical time in the vortex in Ohio. So that was really cool. So I'm based in Atlanta, back and forth between Atlanta and Los Angeles. My husband Shane, who's the co-founder of our nonprofit, Red Clay Yoga, is originally born and raised in LA, View Park, Crenshaw District. Yeah, so it's really nice to be able to visit different spaces and share the practice of yoga and meditation.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And so in sharing the practice in yoga and meditation, what do you feel like? And let's go back to Red Clay, because I know that's a passion project for you. And can you tell us a little bit about like what inspired you?
Yeah, so Red Clay Yoga is the organization that sustains the work that we do through yoga, literature, and art camp for teen girls at Spelman College, Museum of Fine Art. So I started YLA camp, as we affectionately call it, in 2013. It was actually the result of my dissertation. I received my Ph.D. from Emory University, and I wanted to focus on the ways in which yoga and embodied practices like yoga impact the ways in which we learn, specifically for young women of color. And I was inspired by that particular group because I'm a young woman of color. I will always be that. I will always be that young woman who was looking for confirmation, affirmation, anything that reminded me that I belong. And so there's nothing like having your reflection sitting in the seat of teacher, sharing with you wisdom about your own bodies and how powerful we truly are. And so my inspiration comes from my experiences. My inspiration comes from what I wish I would have had when I was 13 through 17 years old. And so Red Clay Yoga is the organization that sustains that work.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. And the ladies, what would you say, because you're working with a lot of young ladies that will grow up to lead the way and pave the way as you are, what would you say is the thing that scares you most that's going on with the upcoming generation, with the ladies that you work with?
I would say not so much afraid of what's happening with them, but more of what adults are lacking awareness of in providing spaces for youth. I see it not to place the blame on, the youth as they experience all that they're going through in this lifetime, because I remember what it was like to be a teenager, so nothing is new. Nothing has changed in terms of like life being hard. But what I would push us to do as adults and as the generation leading these up and coming thinkers and thought leaders are to really provide spaces for us to be connected, for us to be reflective, for us to understand what our purpose is in this world, and not to just become a part of a system that pumps out different people to compartmentalize what we are here to do. And so that is what my goal is. That's my entire intention, is to really just provide space for the youth to be able to understand what are they here to be, who are they here to be.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I know you weren't always feeling this inspired yourself. In fact, you went through a big loss at a very young age of your best friend.
Yeah, so Misty Carter, we were freshman roommates at Spelman College. One of the first people I met with our other roommate, Danica Tisdale, who actually became the first Black Miss Georgia and placed in the top 10 of Miss America. And so we were the three amigas, who were inseparable. And unfortunately, shortly after we graduated from college, Misty was abruptly taken from this world. It's always a challenge to speak about this. Misty was murdered. And it's unfortunate that at such a young age, as a Black woman, as a woman who had so much promise, who was intelligent and brave and beautiful and all of these different things, her life was cut short. And I truly believe that if we would have had more opportunities and spaces to understand what it was that we were here to do, who knows what her fate could have been. And so for me, Yoga Literature and Art Camp is an honoring, it's devotion to her life and to her legacy. We often dreamed of, she wanted to own a massage boutique, and I was going to be teaching yoga and meditation there. And so to know that, I have this commitment to our pact that we made and that I'm carrying it through, and each and every time I do the work of Yoga Literature and Art Camp, it is in honoring and remembrance of her. And so that experience definitely fueled how yoga started to transition from this thing that I saw as like this workout almost. Like I just saw it as this thing that I did just like running or lifting, or, I just saw it as this workout. And so that's when I really had to dig deep into my yoga practice to move me through the challenges of that huge traumatic loss.
And were you with her? Like, what happened? Like, did she get in an altercation, or was it just
so
random?
it was not random. It was unfortunately caught up in a lot of the activity that was happening in Atlanta in the early 2000s. And so, Misty Carter, you can look into that story because it's a powerful story, and I would much rather people look into it and research it so that it can continue to remind us of the work that we still have to do with gun violence. But it was gun violence. Yeah.
And do you still have a connection with her spiritually? Do you speak with her?
I still have dreams about Misty each and every time, and most of them are good ones. Most of them were by the ocean. There's white, there's wind, there's water. I see that as her communication with me that I'm on the right track and that she's proud of me. That's really how I see it.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. I know
absolutely.
It's not easy.
Absolutely.
And what would you, I know yoga is one thing, but there's a lot of people, there's something we've never really talked much about on the podcast once before with Reverend Michael. He lost his father, but you losing your best friend. How would you, or what tips would you give someone out there that has lost someone really close to them to kind of get through that time? Because I know it just doesn't just go away overnight.
Yeah, I really had to understand the stages of grief. I think that understanding something that was so abrupt, and I had never anticipated losing someone to gun violence, who does? And so I had to really ground deep into the reality of what I was experiencing. If I pretended like this was not a traumatic event that was impacting my body, my heart, my actions in the world, then I probably would still be trying to cope with that loss, and it would be showing up in my life in different ways, unresolved. But it wasn't until I came to terms with and was grounded in the reality that I had to go through stages of grief. I had to go through sadness. I had to feel that. I had to go through anger. I had to go through guilt. I had to go through the loss and the longing of knowing that I couldn't fix this. And so my yoga practice has been that tool for me as this embodied practice that allows me to bravely, courageously go through and feel what it was that I had to feel in order to move through it.
That's beautiful. And what you're saying, you can't just pretend like it didn't happen. You actually have to feel these emotions and get them out, like release them in some type of way. And yoga is your release.
Yeah, it is. Yoga, meditation. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so where does the writing part come in it for the ladies, and where does it come in for you?
Yeah, for me, writing was always this thing that I loved to do. It was a retreat ever since I was a little girl. Because I did not necessarily see the main characters. I was publicly educated, went to public school all my life in Dayton, Ohio. Didn't have a ton of diversity when it came to the content and the context of the characters that I would read. The person who I connected the most with was Ramona Quimby. And I just remember, like, when she was age 8, I was probably, like, younger than that and, like, looking to this little girl. But how powerful it could have been for me to have seen reflections that had the same hair as me, the same skin tone, celebrated this body that I'm in. And so I knew that I had to become the author of my own story. I remember as a little girl writing my own stories and writing my friends as the characters in the stories in order for me to read something that I could relate to. I was sent to Columbus, Ohio, which is our capital of Ohio. And I was in this young authors contest, and I remember being celebrated for the creativity in my story. And the creativity was simply what it was that I experienced as a little girl. And so then I started to think, well, how many other little girls like me are longing for representation in text? And so for us to be deliberate about who we center and the work we center and the stories we center at Yoga Literature and Art Camp is the component that's the most essential to me. To be able to read and write your own story is powerful. To not have someone else tell you who you are to be in this world and this society is powerful. To push back and to go into fantasy, to go into sci-fi, to go into poetry, all of these different genres, we exist, and we can only exist when we're able to tell our own stories.
Absolutely, and we're telling our stories more in Hollywood, in books, like in the massive amount of stories that we have now and that we're seeing in the media, in music, and on paper is amazing, and it feels really good. And so what do you feel like would you share if someone, I want to write, I want to be a songwriter, I want to write a book, but I don't know where to start? What advice would you give them?
I advise people all the time to journal. Like, pieces of paper put together are a book, you know? So like if you were deliberate about each time you practice yoga, or maybe not even that rigid, like at the end of the week after yoga practices and you reflect on how that has impacted you, how it impacts how you reflect on your relationships in the world, that's the start of a book. So for me, the first book I really wrote was my dissertation, and it was about Yoga Literature and Art Camp. I'm in the process now of moving through writing a book, and it's really from these collections of all these different parts of my life put together, and now I have to make it in this finished project of a book. So I highly recommend journaling. We encourage the girls at YLA Camp to journal. And it is healing, transformative, and it gives us an opportunity to, again, tell our stories.
Absolutely. I feel like journaling is like an outlet.
Absolutely.
You know, you just put the words on the paper. It's another way of release, even if you don't do yoga or breathwork, even just writing is a way of release. So, and healing if you've been through trauma. So that is amazing. And so I know one thing that we've both talked about together is, you know, being a woman of color and paving the way for so many women. You know, you're looked at as like, oh, she's the only one. She's a token black woman. And one thing that you say in your post is that I'm leaning into my tokenism, you know? And can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the great thing is that I have an awareness, and I see a growing awareness across so many different communities of our ancestors. And so to know that I'm just adding to a lineage of Black women, brown women who have been doing this work for centuries, for long before we were ever thought of, you know, and to know that this isn't new and that I'm simply adding on, that for me allows me to breathe a little bit. I'm like, whew, I'm not the only one. I'm not the first one. We are not the only ones here. And so that awareness between yoga, meditation, doing work of ancestor work, doing work of honoring and understanding where it is, where I come from, that to me gives me a little bit of space to then say, okay, in this present moment, now I can add on to this work and then pass it on to the future generations of these girls who are 13 through 17. And when I talk about tokenism, when people really, it wasn't something that I started. It wasn't something that I started to speak about freely. It was really a response to the response that I get for being on the covers of yoga journals, of being, you know, the headliners of things like Wanderlust and Asheville yoga festivals and Toronto yoga conferences. It comes from a place of knowing the reality of what my lineage has been. And of course, I celebrate my lineage as a Black American, as an African American, as a Black woman. And the only way that I'm going to not blame myself if I do find the challenges and the obstacles is to be grounded in the reality of what I've had to come through, what our ancestors have had to fight, overcome, endure, survive. Like all of these different things impact how I show up in this world. And so when I hear this criticism of me being called a token, I say, you know what, if that is how you see me, let me lean into that, because how dare I not take advantage of the platforms, the opportunities that I'm offered in order to be able to speak, right? To be able to speak to millions of people at a time on a platform where the little girls that I'm working with may never know that we have these platforms, where people may never know the story of Misty Carter and how she was tragically taken from this world. And so who am I not to step onto these spaces and say yes, because they're going to ask someone else. And I know that I'm equipped and able to speak and articulate the words that I'm saying right now. So in those moments, of course, I come with my own list of asks. I come with my own requests and demands that I need for my own self-care, that I need to open the door for someone else. And so for me, if that's how people perceive me, what is the saying? It is not my business what other people think about me.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
That's how I move with that.
You have to, because if not you, then who?
Right.
If not now, then when?
Right.
You know, someone has to go first. You know, you can't be afraid to be first, and you are definitely not afraid to be first. And that's one thing that I love and admire about you is that you are paving the way fiercely and confidently, and you have the words to articulate, you know, what you're doing and why, so that other people that find it challenging to be in the spaces. And I've talked to a lot of other women of color, and they're like, it's hard because I try to do it, and then I'm criticized this one way, then I'm criticized this other way, and I myself and you as well, we've all experienced this, and it does get a little hard for the heart space. Right. So to be able to stand in your power, I really commend you for that. And so do you have a couple of tips for other women who might not be as confident as yourself to be able to move through that?
Well, first of all, I couldn't do it alone. And I know that Nicole Cardoza would not mind me mentioning her name. And I remember, you know, when the tokenism conversation really bubbled up was during the talk of Yoga Journal and the comparison pages of Catherine Budig and Nicole Cardoza. And I remember Nicole reaching out to me immediately because she saw me as someone who had been on the cover of Yoga Journal twice, who had done productions with them and different conferences. And so that's number one. You got to find your community. You got whatever you call it, your tribe, your satsang, your kula, your prayer group, like whoever it is, your girlfriends, your whomever you need. You cannot do this work alone. It wears on you between traveling, between practicing self-care. I'm getting my voice back from being between different climates at a time. And you have to know that you have someone to lean on or lean into. I lean into my teachers, Tracy Stanley, who is my yoga nidra teacher. I see her as someone who I can call on when things get overwhelming. You know, different folks, communities, Octavia Rahim, these are the people who I look to. So that's the number one thing, especially for women of color who have a tendency of thinking that we don't have space to rest. We don't have space to say no. I'm here to let you know, call me. Chelsea Loves Yoga will remind you
yes.
that those boundaries are the only ways, as my teacher, Ma Jaya, says, is to drink as we pour. How in the world am I going to pour out into the world if I'm thirsty? How in the world am I going to support anybody else if I am parched? So I have to continue to renew myself. And so my girlfriends, my sisters are constantly reminding me of that. I also remind people, don't look at this as this destination. Look at it as a journey. I hope I never understand what it feels like to be complete and be done, because that means my life is over. I want to constantly be learning. And so knowing that yoga is a practice and activism is a practice, and you may make mistakes, but how do we learn from those mistakes? How do we use that as fuel to start to move into these spaces of transformation? So yeah, get yourself a team and give yourself patience and time.
I love that. In my book, Let Your Fears Make You Fearless, I call it your A-team.
Yeah,
your A-team.
yeah.
So who is your A-team? Because, and it, you know, I say, you know, your mentor, your best friend, things like that. And it doesn't have to be in any order, but who are your top people? I know you know your husband is a big advocate in your life.
I was going to say, leaning in, first of all, without saying my faith. Right? I have to have a practice that allows me to connect to something that is beyond this physical body right here. My husband, Shane, my partner, when I met Shane, I was in the infant stages of creating yoga literature and art camp, and he was the one who encouraged me and said, how are we going to make this work? And look at us now. You know, we're going into our 7th year of providing tuition-free experiences for girls, and it has in turn inspired him to do the same for boys. And so he's working on that right now. Octavia Rahim is my A-team. This woman right here was the first person I called. She is a former educator as well. We're still educators, former public school educator as well. And she was someone who I called on when I was thinking through the curriculum, or when I'm just calling on and saying, girl, I need a moment, right? My parents have always been my biggest cheerleaders, my granny, my grandmother. These are people who are key to my making it each day, day by day. And then, of course, my girls, Yoga Literature and Art Camp, the young women who are matriculating through high school right now and now through college. These are the people who keep me going.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And what do you feel like, you have your A-team, you're traveling around the world, and you said you're working on a book. Okay. Can you let us know what that process is looking like right now?
It is a process. It is a process, again, of drinking as I pour, of seeing every single thing that I encounter, every single relationship person being a part of this, not looking at anything as arbitrary, not looking at anything as a coincidence. It is very divine that we're sitting here right now, that it lined up, that you're just coming in from Egypt. I'm just coming in from out of the country, and then Ojai, only in LA for 24 hours, really. And so for me, it's moments. These are the moments that make up those accessible, tangible, accessible ways that we can understand the power of yoga, the power of connection, the power of meditation. And so the process for me is looking at each moment as magic and journaling about it. I'm getting in the habit of journaling every day. It was something that I already did, but life happens and then you lose that sometimes. I lost it and I'm returning to it. And so that's really helping me, being unapologetic about what it is that I need to be able to concentrate on writing. So if that means that I need to go away for 48 hours, I have to now work with my partner to figure out how are we going to make this happen. Right. And so carving out space for the magic to happen. So that has been the process. I'll let you know when I'm finished. I'll probably call you crying a couple of times, too.
I'm going to be the first one to read it and the first one to sing your praises. And I know it's going to be good. I know it's going to be great. And you mentioned, taking care of yourself and making sure you're okay. And so can you share, I know you mentioned journaling, but can you share some other things that you like to do just to love up on yourself?
Sure. Well, I want to say that one of my number one teachers, coincidentally, who teaches me to get loved up is my mother in love. Okay? I didn't mention them when I said my A-team, but my in-laws, what we call our in-laws, have been essential in that process. They are here in Los Angeles, and I have definitely learned how to luxuriate from my mother-in-law, Denise Roberts, who is a breast cancer survivor. Wow. And so I've learned from that. I've learned from her and how to not take life for granted, right? Every day is a celebration. Why save the candle or the bubble bath for a special occasion? Right now is a special occasion. So bubble baths, walks, massages. If I've got to figure out how to budget to make that happen, I'm always about keeping it real with my community and not taking it for granted that it's a luxury and a privilege for me to be able to say, let me find the best massage in town and do that. And also being honest about, all right, well, if I can't do an hour, well, maybe let me look into 30 minutes. So I encourage people, whatever it is that you think you're not worth, do that thing. Anything that you think you can't afford, give it a try. I promise. In most cases, and of course this comes with privilege, I promise in most cases we can afford it. And so,
Absolutely. Yes. And what you're speaking to is something that I like to talk about. It's part of manifestation because at first you have to feel like you deserve it and you're worth it. And we've been told so much that, that's too expensive. You can't afford that. But I love what you're sharing. And I love that you say, okay, yes, it is a privilege to eventually be able to afford these things. But at first you have to know that you are worthy of all the beautiful things in the world. And I hope everyone listening out there knows that we all deserve. And when I see people with boats and yachts and planes and getting massages and nice clothes, I grew up on a helping hand. So at some point I had to say, I am worth nice clothes. I am worth clothes and shoes that I buy myself. They're not hand-me-down. And so I love that you say that. And for someone who doesn't have.
Because that's reality.
That's reality.
That's reality,
So what would you say? I can't get a massage. All my clothes are hand-me-down, but I want to feel valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So in yoga, the sister science to yoga, Ayurveda, a practice that when I was going through my teacher's training of being a school teacher, being a baller on a budget, being a person who was on a payment plan for paying for a teacher's training, having to scrub, the windows of yoga studios in order to barter to get into a class, that in Ayurveda, I learned the practice of self-massage. And so getting oil, like going to your local grocery store, and it may not be the highest grade oil that you can use just yet, but something to moisturize the skin, and applying abhyanga or self-massage before you get into bed at night, just massaging the joints. Perhaps you have an affirmation that you want to say over while you're really loving on yourself in this process. I think that that's important, to be grounded in a reality that, no, we don't have access. Not everyone has access, and it's a direct reflection of the society that we live in, of structural oppression, of the ways in which people are marginalized. So I do not diminish that in any way. And you're absolutely right. Also seeing ourselves in a way that we are worthy of this. So if that means that my massage has to be applied by self, or calling a good friend that you trust and love their touch, that you exchange that and you barter and take turns massaging each other, right? Running a bath if you can. We have the privilege of having water, clean water. I see that as a luxury. So anything that we may take for granted, seeing the ways in which that we can kind of make that the most luxurious experience for us.
I love that. And I love self-massage. And even though I get massages out in the streets, I always, just last night, I just got off the plane, I got podcasting all day, I gave myself a massage. You know, I didn't have time to go out. And I think that's so beautiful and important, because I think everyone listening can, olive oil, coconut oil, bring that cooking grease. I don't care if it's Crisco.
I'm saying.
Bring it out. Massage yourself down. Take a shower, because then it's going to make your skin really soft too. Whatever
people
oil.
always talk to me about my skin, and I'm like, Abianga.
It's glowing too. You are glowing. But thank you for sharing your secrets. And speaking of that, what would you say, you know, because we talk about, you know, all of the oppression and the injustices, and especially recently, there's been a lot of police brutality. And, you know, how are you using, you know, your platform and what you're doing to kind of speak to, is it possible to use yoga to counteract all of these things happening, you know, in our society today?
That's my hope. That's what I do through the work that we provide through Red Clay Yoga. I think that at the heart of it, for us to understand that not everybody is called to be an activist. Not everybody is called to be on the front line and, you know, protesting. I think that we all have our different ways that we contribute to this world in contributing to justice. And so for me, I like to look at yoga as a way for us to get quiet to understand what our contribution is, first of all. Also, if you're looking to have difficult conversations within communities that may be mixed in terms of race or culture or accessibility, socioeconomic status, I think it is imperative that we integrate yoga in that process. For me, whenever I'm about to have a tough conversation, I have to resource myself. I have to make sure that I'm grounded. I have to make sure that I'm breathing. I have to think about what are my practices before this conversation. And that's what we do with yoga. With Red Clay Yoga, Shane and I, we co-facilitate spaces along with our Red Clay Yoga community in Atlanta for having difficult conversations about justice, about oppression, about the ways in which people benefit from other people's oppression. And I couldn't imagine doing that without yoga. I couldn't imagine doing that without having deep breaths before, during, and after. Moving that energy after the conversation.
Absolutely. And what do you think is the most difficult conversation you've had to have, if you can share?
I think that one of the most difficult conversations, especially around privilege, it's really a challenge to get people to understand privilege on a micro and macro level. When we talk about the privileges that Black folks in the United States in particular have been denied since the beginning of our first entry here, I think it's important for us to realize that that is a different experience than our individual experiences. I've just spoken about my own privilege, and I certainly don't have privilege in other spaces. It shifts depending on the space that you're in. I may go to another country and come with my United States passport and have a lot of privilege, but then walk into another space and because of the color of my skin may not have another privilege. So one of the most challenging conversations is getting people to understand that the language around privilege and oppression. A lot of deflection or guilt or misunderstandings can come up when people think that there is blame within that conversation. And privilege is something that may or may not be your fault. You may just be born with it.
And how do you, when you have privilege, how do you speak with someone who doesn't have the same privileges that you might have?
I think that yoga is that tool. I think that yoga is the thing that starts to peel back the layers to show us actually how we can connect. One of my favorite writers, James Baldwin, once said, would always say that we use our suffering to understand the suffering of others, and then we use that collective suffering in order to move it, transform it, to move deeper into love. And so I think that the number one thing when trying to have those difficult conversations is to really level it out and connect on the spaces of how we are both suffering. When I think about the injustices of African Americans in particular, white folks are suffering just as much. Maybe not just as much. Let me reframe that. White folks are suffering as well. It is suffering to be enabled to move through this world with a privilege based on someone else's suffering. It is impossible for you to not suffer too. My liberation is deeply connected to your liberation. Just as Martin Luther King said, you know, if I'm not free, my freedom depends on yours. And so for me, that's where I start with folks who just don't want to have that conversation. We have all suffered. We've all experienced suffering. So how can we use that to move deeper into love? And for me, love is deeply political.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you feel like love is political?
Yeah, so love is political because how can you possibly love and have love for yourself in the midst of injustice when you're benefiting from the injustice of someone else? Mm-hmm. Now, I understand this fully. I understand how I'm a participant in someone else's suffering by the things that I'm able, driving in a car, getting on a plane. That is offering suffering to someone else, to the environment, to a community. And so once I face myself with that, once I'm faced with that, I understand how this is pushing me back or keeping me from love. And so it's only through that recognition that I can actually love fully. I can't love if there's a part of me that I'm denying and pretending doesn't exist. I can't love if I pretend that I'm not also impacting someone's life in ways of suffering. And so I think that love is political because it presses you to face the parts of you that have been hidden and may not have received the love. Mm-hmm. And that happens in our relationships too.
Absolutely. It sounds like awareness, like just being aware and acknowledging, hey, this is where I am loving and this is where I might not be loving, or me living my life is actually causing harm to another person. And I think that's beautiful because we all have that, you know, and one thing that I practice in yoga and I talk about a lot is causing the least amount of harm because I don't feel like I ever walk through the world and not cause harm to someone or something just by being. And I love that you're saying that. And how do you feel that, what are some of the things that you're doing? Like you said, you have some ways that you are causing harm. You're not. What are the things you put in your daily life to cause less harm?
Being mindful of my interactions with folks, just how I can even participate in dismissing, just acknowledging someone, saying hello. I may be having a bad day or a challenging day, and I'm so rushed that I just don't have time, and I'm blowing people off. Getting, like, it's not that serious, right? Like, coming to terms with that. Things as simple as recycling. Like, I feel like that gets, like, this very, like, reduced, like, pat on the back in many ways. But imagine if we all did. Imagine if it was a priority. I'm learning to not use plastic as much when I think about the environment. Having a cute water bottle to make sure
and
that
water bottle is cute.
Yeah,
look at this cute water bottle right here. Oh, hi. Awesome humans. I love that.
Yes. So, you know, you have to look at the small pebbles that we place into those ponds that create either a small or large ripple that will hopefully connect to someone else's contribution. Being a part of yoga literature and art camp is my contribution to this world. Creating spaces for young women of color to become leaders, so maybe they are the thought leaders who create the next way that we heal this world and this environment. You know, just being kind to myself. These are the ways that I see my contribution to creating the least amount of harm so that I can in turn share that with the next person I'm in contact with.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And what do you feel like if you had one thing you can tell your 14-year-old self, what would that be?
That you are enough. As simple as that. I wish that my 14-year-old self would have known that she was enough. And there must have been a piece of me that knew that because otherwise I don't know if I would have been here right now to keep it going. But yeah, that I'm enough, that my existence is enough, that this breath is enough in order to get me to the next step to figure out what my purpose is here. I'm enough.
That's beautiful. I am enough. I love that. That's one I always have to tell myself as well. And what is one of the biggest challenges you're facing right now? It seems like everything is going for you. You got your book coming, you're writing, got a beautiful, supportive husband, family life, got your 18.
Yeah.
So what's challenging for you?
Challenging for me right now is I did a practice just recently where I looked at the different parts and aspects of my life that I really value and numbering them on the amount of time that I devote to them. And I don't devote a lot of time to play. I feel like I am super serious, and I think that takes a toll on the ways that I approach creativity, the way that I stop myself short of moving on an idea. I see myself resistant in that, still in myself, and I find that the more that I create time for play, to be playful, to travel without working, these are the components that are going to keep me light and sustaining the work that I do that is quite serious. Yeah, so I'm looking to loosen up.
Yes, playtime. We need to go dancing next time we hang out.
We've danced before.
At Essence Festival. That was so much fun because we never hung out like that. We would have dinners, we would have these deep talks, but we never just got to let our hair down and shake our booties.
Oh, and yes, we did.
And yes, we did. We broke it all the way down. I want to have everyone know that we are not twerkless.
We got our twerk on.
We got our twerk on. Oh, that was so much fun. That was so much fun. And so what would you say if you just have one more thing you want to leave out there for all of those listening to help them continue on their path? What would you want to leave with the listeners?
That we are all unique pieces of this puzzle called life. And that the more that we acknowledge, embrace, and celebrate that uniqueness is the sooner we will be able to celebrate the differences that we come across in each other. So for me, it's important that we honor our stories, honor our paths, honor whatever it is that got you to hearing our voices today or seeing our images, honor that. And so for me, you know, this is how I started Chelsea Loves Yoga in the first place. I interviewed you.
Right.
Because I said, I know that there are people out here with stories for how they ended up on this path. We're all here together now, but our ways that we got here are so different, and that's the power. And that's how we can move forward and see this world the way that I hope was intended, and that's peace and love and happiness.
That's so beautiful, and I'm glad you brought that up because I remember when you reached out to me, and I don't think I ever tell you how much that meant to me because, you know, I would reach out to people and I would try, let's do this and let's do this, and people always wonder, like, why are you reaching out to me? And I would get rejected. And so and I'm really not used to reaching out, you know, and so, but I was like, I want to connect with other women of color, and, you know, sometimes it's very competitive, and so when you reached out to me, I was like, yes, finally someone that just wants to like connect and share each other, and it really did give me hope. And now it's many of us that bond together and hang out and support each other. It is so important.
Yeah, you said something really important, Koya, when you just said that you don't reach out. That has been a challenge for me, to reach out. And that day that I reached out, that was a practice for me of like, is she gonna say no? Is she gonna ignore it? And I imagine that is a fear that a lot of us can resonate with, that it's this fear of rejection. And so that one day of reaching out to you brought us to this moment. And so I hope that we continue, especially as women of color, especially as Black and brown women, any way that you feel marginalized or alone or isolated, whether you're a white male or a Black woman, like whomever, to continue to reach out, to folks. That is definitely something that I'm working on and practicing. So thank you for continuing to reach out to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will always do it. And I think reaching out, even when you're scared.
Yep.
Like you said, even when you fear rejection, but doing it anyway, because the worst thing that can happen is that you won't get a response.
Right.
Which if you don't reach out, you won't get a response either.
Exactly. So why not?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all of your wisdom. Just share with people where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsea Loves Yoga is where I've been living for a while. Since 2011 is when I started the blog. So Chelsea Loves Yoga across all social, and that's the website. And then also the nonprofit work we do is at redclayyoga.org.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We're going to make a little heart.
Oh, yes, honey.
Until next time, get loved up.
Yes.
Bye.